Well, hey guys, welcome to Ask Aaron. We are nearing the end of our canceled series, but we've got a few more. This week's message was on canceling unforgiveness. And if you missed it, you can go to hillcityhudson.org/media, or you can watch it on our Facebook or YouTube pages. I'm going to answer a couple questions that I got. As always, these are my views, not the church's, but they tend to agree. And if you've got any questions, feel free to shoot me a text, drop them in the comment sections below, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So, the whole idea of this week's message was around the idea that cancel culture is built on the idea that the people doing the canceling have never done anything wrong, and that is completely unfounded and untrue, especially when we look at Scripture and we see that everybody falls short of the top standard, that is God's holiness and righteousness. And so all of us in some capacity have fallen short and need to be forgiven. And Jesus offers us that forgiveness. We celebrated that a couple weeks ago during Easter. And so the idea is that if we have been forgiven, God calls us to forgive. And that doesn't mean to forget. And it doesn't mean that we should allow people back into places where they don't belong in our lives, give them say or authority over us. But it does mean that we should stop carrying around that burden or that thing that we haven't forgiven them for, because Scriptures teaches that if we want to be forgiven, we need to forgive, and that we'll be forgiven as much as we are willing to forgive others. It's right there in the Lord's Prayer, right? I grew up Baptist, so forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, but maybe you're a trespasses or a sins person. All the same kind of language. So anyway, that was what the message was about. Would encourage you to check that out. If you want to hang with me here, our first question is, if I'm not supposed to feel joy when my enemy or when the person who has sinned against me falls or suffers, what am I supposed to feel? Because we talked about how unforgiveness can also sort of rear its head in the form of this idea that when our enemy or our opponent suffers, we feel excited and we feel joy over that, and Scripture teaches that that's no good either. And so I guess my advice or my answer to that question is, if someone in your life who has wronged you or hurt you suffers or fails, obviously I think the desired feeling would be empathy, right? That you know what it's like to suffer, you know what it's like to struggle, and you want what's best for them. And so you feel empathetic, you feel drawn to help. Jesus asks us to pray for our enemies and to give the shirt off of our back. We referenced that verse, turn the other cheek, give them access to do something again. I think the reality is that the desired feeling would be empathy, right? That we would be able to relate to them and then be drawn to want to serve. But that's not always going to be the case. And so if you're looking for the bare minimum, or if you're looking for just a good place to start, I think the place to start is this idea that they've been wronged or they've been hurt, but we're not experiencing joy. We don't want to pile on. We don't want to rub it in their face. So sort of indifference would be a good place to start, right? Our enemy has been hurt, but we just see it as a normal thing that occurs during life. And then you work your way towards empathy and wanting to serve. So, perhaps you can work from just this total indifference towards the idea that you're going to reach out, send a text, see if they're okay. Then after that, you're going to empathize. You're going to share in their hurt. You're going to say, I remember when I was hurt, and I definitely wish that wasn't happening for you. And then sort of lastly, you get to this third step of, I want to help you. I'm reaching out to see if I can be of any assistance to help you with the hurt that you're experiencing, because the end goal is for us to be Christ to them in that situation. And so as we continue to grow in our ability to empathize and to suffer alongside people, we will be able to reach out and serve them the way that Christ served us, right? Jesus washes the feet of the disciples even right before they're going to abandon him and run away. And so there's really just this idea of wanting to be as Christ-like as possible, but it has to start somewhere. So if you can start without feeling joy or feeling, yeah, they got what they deserved, then I think that's a good place to start, and you can work your way up towards really being empathetic and suffering with them and then finding ways to serve them. Okay? The other question that I got this week was around the same sort of idea, and it's about when other people suffer for doing things that are ungodly, right? There are all sorts of people in our world that are doing things that are not godly or that are not of God. And the question is, what happens, or should I interfere when I see someone else suffering consequences that I believe to be God's judgment on them for their immoral behavior? And some of that we're going to talk about this week in our upcoming message, which is about judgment. But I think the first step in that entire process is really checking your heart. Do you believe that they're being judged by God because you disagree with them or you have something against them? Or do you go to Scripture, check the fruit of their behaviors, their beliefs, and their actions and say, no, they are directly disobeying God, and so this is a result of them not living that life, right? Because as Christians, we believe that if you don't believe in Jesus or you don't give your heart to Jesus, that you are doomed to spend an eternity apart from God. That is a judgment. That is a penalty that you will suffer because of your choices, behaviors, all of that. So that does happen, but we shouldn't wish that for anyone, right? And so when we experience that initial thought, I think they're suffering this because of God's judgment on them, you have to ask yourself, where did that idea come from? Did it come from my heart, from my sin nature? Did it come from my desire to see them suffer? Or does it come from my understanding of Scripture and my understanding of who Jesus is? Because who Jesus is someone who went to the cross so that anyone who believes in him could be saved. And so Jesus' desire is for that person to change their behavior. Now, sometimes judgment or suffering causes people to change their behavior, and I do think that God allows people to suffer. A lot of times people have to hit rock bottom before they make the choice to give their life over to Christ or to, have that come to Jesus moment. And so if you see someone struggling through what you believe to be God's judgment, again, don't rub their face in it. Don't necessarily even go to them and bring it to their attention. Hey, I think you're suffering because you're not following God. Now, eventually, I think, yes, that's a good thing to say to people if they continue to disobey and they continue to wonder why they're suffering. But you can start off by sympathizing. Hey, it looks like what you're going through is really difficult. Have you ever thought about why you're going through it? Have you ever asked yourself what the cause of your suffering is? Have you ever, thought about a relationship with God and whether or not you're being true to what God created you to be or asks you to do? Eventually, yes, you can get to a point where you can ask them, do you think you're suffering because you're not following God's plan for your life? But that's not a great place to start. So a good place to start is just by reaching out, making sure that your heart is in the right spot, and being willing to sympathize, empathize, tell them that you're sorry that they're struggling, and ask them to contemplate. It's usually better if people come to the conclusion of why they're suffering or that they're suffering for a certain reason on their own, right? Nobody likes to be told why when they are suffering. They just want somebody to come alongside them. So the more you can walk with someone and suffer alongside them and be a part of helping them to realize that perhaps the reason that they're struggling is that God has asked them to live a different way, and then having them truly turn their life over to Him, the more you can be a part of that process instead of just a judgmental person, I think you're going to see more success in that area. So those are the questions we got this week. Thank you for tuning in to Ask Aaron. Hope you're having a great week. You can join us this Sunday, hillcityhudson.org/media. You can watch on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll see you next week for Ask Aaron. Have a great one, everybody.